Hiring managers of Reddit, what was your most WTF is wrong with this person moment you've had during an interview? Obligatory, not a hiring manager, but I still had to interview some candidates. Some of the walls in the office were painted a vague brownish color. Partway during the interview, this guy starts looking around with a really spaced out look and says, "This office really reminds me of a cardboard box. But not in a bad way, like the kind of box that you put things in, you know?" He then decided that he didn't want the job and left before the interview was over. I mean, I can't say I blame him. If the office you are interviewing at looks neglected, the company probably isn't investing money in other places. Employees, for example. My wife was interviewing an early college student for a paid internship at a pharma company, and he just stared at her breasts the whole time. She was not displaying any cleavage or skin. He just stared. Asked a male applicant about a few specific projects he'd done with people I've met. His comments about male collaborators were perfectly normal and respectful. His comments about female collaborators were dismissive, condescending, and inappropriately familiar. I know there are lots of sexist people out there, but not being able to conceal it for a 30-minute interview? I was hiring senior software engineers and ended up doing a group phone interview with one particular individual who had to do all of his thinking on paper. When I would ask him a technical question, you could hear the pause and the furious scribbling over the phone while he tried to come up with the answer. I've had eccentric people in many teams before, so this wasn't an issue in and of itself, provided he could still come up with the results. But where we realized there was perhaps a bigger issue was in him trying to explain his work by holding his drawing up to the phone and asking if this addressed the problem. This was not a video conference call. When this was pointed out, there was more furious scribbling, followed by the same pattern, several times. Needless to say, we decided to not move forward. I'm not sure he ever figured out the problem. Somewhat related, I also had an individual from a department I absorbed, who I was unable to reach by phone. When I visited his desk to find out if there was a problem with his phone, he indicated that it had started ringing, something it had never done in his 6+ years at the company, so he thought there was something wrong with it and simply unplugged. And simply, as someone who hates phone calls with a passion, I feel I can relate to that second guy. I've only been part of the job interviewing process once, and this one applicant was a disaster. Right off the bat, after she meets myself and the business owner, she proceeds to make a joke about CM. The interview was 2 hours and 90% of that was her telling us her life story. She swore multiple times. She used a racial slur when referring to one of the lecturers from the university we both attended. She interrupted me when I spoke. She did not answer interview questions, just kept talking about her childhood. She told us about 2 people organizations she is busy suing. Obviously did not get the job. Not a hiring manager exactly, but have been with the company long enough that they let me run the occasional interview for the delivery drivers that work under me. There was a guy who came in and already seemed off when asking for an application. They handed him one because why not, and he came back the next day and handed it back filled out, minimally. Then kept asking, so when is my interview? They just told them they would call him when they figured it out, but after ghosting him for a couple days, he began calling up every day asking when he could come in for an interview. They said I should just sit down with him and tell him we aren't hiring and we will let him know if anything changes. So I sat down in a booth and waited for this guy to come in. Then I see through the window him getting out of his car, in our work uniform. See, we give you all that stuff your first day and he hasn't even had an interview. He comes in and sits down opposite me and we exchanged pleasantries, and he asks me if I like his uniform. I say yeah, but question who gave it to him, and he tells me he made it. I ask him why he made a uniform if we give him a few, and he told me it was because we hadn't given him one. He also started being very rude after this question, so I guess I hurt his feelings. I told him what I was supposed to tell him, but he also didn't have a functioning car but 2 days a week and somehow wanted full-time hours, so I denied him for that reason, but yeah, definitely strange at the least. He took dress for the job, you odd, literally. Years back we were hiring for a database administrator job and a young woman came in to interview. When it was my turn to talk to her, she was already seated in the room, and the first thing I notice is her dress. It's kind of gauze material, and as transparent as fabric can get without getting wet. I could not only see she wasn't wearing a bra, but could clearly see her nipple piercings and even make a pretty good guess at the exact color of her nipples. So we talked for a while, and when we were done I stood up and excused myself. She stood up to shake my hand, and now I could see her landing strip pubic hair through the dress. It was super weird, and to this day I still wonder if it was a real interview or some kind of HR baited trap. The office chipped in for a stripper to interview for a secretarial position. It was known that the manager never reviewed resumes prior to the interview. After a few minutes of painful conversation and classification questions, he finally asks what skill set she brought to the table. She pulls out the boombox and proceeds with the show. Asked a guy the normal "tell me about a time you had to think outside the box to solve a problem." Tells me a story about working in the student union Chick-fil-A. He is opening the store and can tell the gas line is leaking when he turns on the fryer. His manager won't be in for an hour, so he decides to use the rubber gloves for food prep to make a makeshift gasket to plug the leak. Does that. Opens the store, serves people until the manager comes in, who promptly closes the store, hits the emergency shut off and calls the gas company and fire department. He was beaming at the end and just talking about how he managed to keep the store running until the manager came in. I did not hire him. I think ya blew it. That's the dude that shows up during a hurricane. Just interviewed a new college grad for a tech position that will have a lot of customer service with the public. He knows this. Proceeds to tell us how he is an introvert, without any prompting, how he has never had a job before, was too involved with D&D and extra activities, and just stared at the table the whole interview. Had a good enough resume, engineering degree from a good school, but just wasn't able to socialize. Not sure what type of job he really wanted to work in. It sure wasn't the one he applied for. I had a friend mention that he's a DM in an interview, and one of the managers asked him to do NPC voices. He got the job with a stellar goblin voice. Worked at a pizza place. Older looking Karen comes in and asks to speak to the manager. GM was there that day, so I just go get him, assuming she's asking about a job. "Are you all still hiring?" "Yes, ma'am." "And how long do you normally take to look through applications?" "About a week or two." Q Karen voice: "Well, that's interesting because I applied here a month ago and haven't heard back." At this point GM is shocked with the sudden shift in this lady's tone. We did just clean out the office, so your application may have gotten lost. If you'd like you can fill out another one and number. No, number. I want you to find my application. At this point I can see my GM start to do the math here. She's yelling at him like an angry customer, but she's an applicant, so I could tell he wasn't really sure whether to put on the customer service face or the angry boss face. Then the light bulb comes on. "And what's your availability, mom?" "Mornings." "Yeah, that's too bad. We're actually all booked on mornings." "We weren't. So you might wanna try the Domino's across the street." Bye. Posted an ad for taxi drivers on Craigslist and got a picture of some anime samurai, along with a long dissertation on how the applicant was really into comics and anime, but didn't answer any of the questions. I conducted interviews for a fairly competitive student leadership organization at my undergrad. We had fairly typical questions asking people about what they could bring to the org, why they wanted to join, etc. We also added one fun question at the end of each interview just to lighten the mood and see a less formal response from candidates. If I recall correctly, it was something along the lines of, "If a penguin in a sombrero walked into this room right now, why is it here and what would he say?" Most candidates would chuckle and say something generic about fiestas or penguin fiestas. Or one candidate though, she went on a long tirade about how she would think it was an elaborate plot by her mother trying to spy on her because she had trust issues with her parents. Continued by explaining in detail for about 10 minutes her issues with her parents and why she feels like a failure as a child. She did not get an offer. Yay. The answer we were looking for is Taco Tuesday. I was hiring for a new supervisor for our data entry division. We only had one candidate who was recommended to us. The interview was supposed to be just a formality, and it went very well overall. He was intelligent, well put together, seemed to know his stuff. Until the end, we were shaking hands and he seemingly lost control and started raving about how something I had said in the interview reminded him of poop. Interviewed a lady for a receptionist position. She had marked on her application that she had previous convictions, so of course I asked about that. She informs me that she recently got out of prison because she was convicted of molesting her own daughter. She goes on to say that the charge and conviction was bogus because all she was doing was teaching her daughter how to masturbate, and continues on in graphic detail how she was teaching her daughter. Very disturbing. She did not get the job. I was interviewing senior in college for a position during the school year that would require a lot of independent judgment on her part. It was a competitive position that paid well and had good hours. In the interview, I asked her, "Can you tell me about a mistake you've made and what you learned from it?" This question is very relevant for gauging a person's judgment. She is quiet for several seconds. No problem. So I say, "Please feel free to take a minute to think about it." A solid 2 minutes go by before I finally say, "We can come back to this at the end of the interview if you'd like." She says okay. We finish the rest of the questions. Me, "Okay, why don't you take another minute to think about the question pertaining to the mistake you've made and what you learned from it?" Her, "Nope, I'm good." Me, "Oh, are you not interested in the job anymore?" Her, "Oh, I'm still interested." Me, "So would you like to answer the question?" Her, "No, I said I'm good." She did not get the job. So, mildly in reverse of the question, but this was the moment I broke down an interviewee the worst. When interviewing, I like to throw in a couple curveball questions not related to work just to see how a person will fit with the team. This was a kid fresh from school trying to get an IT job to get his foot in the door. I said to him, "So, we are all a little nerdy and enjoy talking about comics here and there. We all agree on this one point, and I want to see if you're in line. Marvel or DC?" I thought I was clear with tone of voice and stuff that it was a joke. The poor kid just shut down. He had no idea what to say. He stammered and moaned before I said it was a joke and not to worry about it. It threw him off for the rest of the interview though. It broke his brain. Wound up hiring him, and glad we did. Kid is amazing. I can now give him crap about that interview moment and he's cool with it. I didn't know what to think, man. You guys were firing off IT questions and suddenly freaking what? Comics? I don't. What? LOL, I had a similar question. Star Wars or Star Trek? Apparently I gave the right answer. Hiring for a process support role through a staffing agency earlier this year. A candidate comes in, we do the "tell me about yourself" dance, and I dig in with some situational questions, one of which dealt with how they had handled joining a new team with strong, sometimes conflicting personalities. Their reply, thick Long Island accent. "Oh sure, I dealt with that before. You know, I'm not racist." But they then proceeded to make racist comments about the ethnic group my wife is from. 0/10, did not hire. You know, I'm not racist. But, and we're done. Applicants stated during the job interview that they didn't read the job description and had no idea what this position was, and they were an internal applicant, so we pretty much stopped right there. Like many others here, I'm also not a hiring manager, but my role as training specialist required me to interview people from time to time. Was hiring for an entry-level payroll consultant at a call center. Nothing difficult. 6 weeks training and business casual atmosphere. Had my last interview scheduled for 2 p.m. 2 p.m. rolls around and the dude hasn't shown yet. I have nothing else going on, so I decide to wait a bit, but having not received a courtesy call saying he's going to be late, his chances were already thin. 2:15 p.m. rolls around and a minivan pulls in front of our lobby. A very large, horizontal not vertical, guy gets out from the passenger side. Flip-flops, basketball shorts, Godzilla t-shirt. Minivan pulls away. He walks in and says he's here for the interview at 2. Doesn't mention being late. At this point I've already made up my mind that he wasn't getting the job. Didn't bring a resume. Not dressed appropriately and late. I inform him of these things and he shrugs, saying something along the lines of his mom wanted him to get a job instead of being at the house all the time. Shocker. And asks if he can wait in our break room as he has friends who work here and heard we have a switch. I explained that we're a secure site so he can't go past the glass doors in our lobby, but he's welcome to wait there. Had plenty of people who often got dropped off for interviews, so this was pretty standard. That's dumb. Whatever was the last thing I remember from his mumbling. At a complete loss I badge through the doors and leave because I'm just over it. I get an IM 20 minutes later that security had to ask him to leave the property because he was making the receptionist uncomfortable with his conversations regarding politics. From that day forward we no longer let people wait in our lobby and stopped showing the news on the lobby television. And what do you think you could bring to this role? Hire me and find out. We stopped the interview then and there. He complained to the CEO that we'd treated him unfairly. He was only interviewing because of a personal recommendation. I think he believed this entitled him to a job. The CEO laughed in his face. My friend is the manager of an elite equestrian stable. I used to work there too and witness the whole thing. She interviewed a man for an opening we had for a stable hand. It was pouring and freezing that day. He brought his toddler, who was not even remotely dressed for the weather. He asked us, the other people obviously busy working hard, loading hay, dumping water buckets, grooming giant hulking animals, if we could watch her while he interviewed. We had to grab her and physically hand her back to him when she tried to run under a horse. He expected new boots and clothing to be supplied to him. He asked if we really work when it rains and is cold like it was, and was visibly shocked at the answer of yes, of course. He did not get hired. No, we just let the horses starve when it rains. Obligatory, not a hiring manager directly but involved in interviews for general laborer positions that, if hired, they could have ended up in my department. I'm a 20-something-year-old woman. We constantly had people coming in to interview that would crap talk younger generations and or women while I'm sitting there as their potential boss. No offense. Always put me off. Not about hiring. Reminds me of a colleague who, on a conference call with a Shanghai-based manager representing the team in Shanghai, starts with perhaps I shouldn't be saying this but and goes on a rant about the Chinese. I mean, he could have complained about this or that engineer. Fine. But him ranting on the Chinese was a particularly cringe experience. I guess he didn't even make it to the interview part, but almost, when the person was already 45 minutes late for their interview, walks up to the glass storefront, where I can clearly see him, and then glances at his watch, so he knows he's super late. Naturally he whips out a cigarette and smokes it leisurely outside, then comes in smelling like an ashtray and says his name and that he's here for an interview. So I said, sorry buddy, the only interview I had under that name was almost an hour ago. It would have been only 45 minutes if you hadn't stopped right outside the door to smoke though. I figured he would try to lie and say he got the time wrong. But no, not even that smart. He says, yeah, I was running late and then I was nervous about coming in late so I had a smoke first. Can we do it now or should I reschedule? Number, neither. Goodbye now. I have a couple but the most recent was when a guy started the interview with, this is a really big butt freaking building isn't it? He only cursed more and more from there. I'm not a prude, cursing is expected within reason at most jobs, but you should be able to keep it in check for the actual interview. A little in his defense though, this building is really freaking big. Opening this post I thought I might contribute some of my own blunders. Reading the thread makes me realize that while I'm not the best at interviews, I'm nowhere near the quality of most of these applicants. A lady walked into the office with sweatpants on, a nice blouse, and sunglasses. We asked her to take the glasses off and she declined, saying fluorescent lights hurt her eyes. We gave her the interview questions anyway. We asked what her strengths and weaknesses were. She gave us nothing but weaknesses. She couldn't stand still for more than 5 minutes and really didn't like talking to people. She applied for a cashier position. The guy who said that he had a master's in computer science, with a bunch of detail on which classes he had taken, projects, etc. Cool. He said that he was an expert in SQL. I set up a problem with 2 tables, and asked him to give me a join query. Nope. Couldn't do it. I asked for a count of records in a single table. Nope. Couldn't do it. He said that he was an expert in C and Python, including TAing the class for both. I asked him to do FizzBuzz in one of them. Nope. Couldn't do it. By this point, I was just in awe of the gall of this guy. I was trying to see how far he would go. He said that one of his projects was to write a linker, and that he received an award for it. I asked how he solved handling unknown references. This is a standard problem with linkers that they have to solve if they're using libraries. Usually someone would talk about weak references or multiple library scans or even topological sorting. Nope, nothing. As far as I can tell, his resume was entirely made up from the posted curriculum of a university. I'm always astonished at the amount of people that apparently freak up FizzBuzz. Not hiring manager, but did hiring at college career fairs for junior software developer roles. This one guy was a junior in college, came up to me, handed me his resume. First thing I notice is that this resume is half blank, and that's being kind of generous. The items on his resume literally were graduation date, major, HS graduation date, HS GPA, but no college GPA, LOL, ACT-SAT math scores, like 3 programming languages marked as moderate, and that's about it. No mention of classwork done. No mention of any programming outside of class done. No mention of any previous work experiences or anything even remotely related like volunteer work. That by itself didn't automatically get you into the no pile, but when I asked him what he was looking for, he rambled for like 2 full minutes some BS that I didn't remember but easily would have gotten him to the front page of I Am Verismith. The hiring manager still has his resume pinned to her wall as an example of terrible resumes. I hire art department members for film. We started the interview, then she started to talk weird, almost like a bad Grinch impression. After a very awkward 5-minute in character interview, I admit I was confused as to what was going on. She admits she used attempts at working in the art department as a way to break into her real passion, acting. I kindly explained it was art department only. She then said she had nothing to show me, and tried to see if I could get somebody to let her audition. I try to explain to her no. She doesn't quite leave immediately, so there's some awkward banter, and then silence before she says she'll go. I could never quite tell when she was in character, or when she wasn't. To this day I don't even know her real voice. It felt like a really bad comedy skit, like the Amanda Show or something. She emailed me twice to see if I could land her a position, then said she would be fine with just a crew position. I ignored all her messages. When the interviewer asked for my previous salary and I politely refused to tell him, practically the guy went aggressive, verbally, with me for not telling him. I told my reason was that I will miss my chance to negotiate the salary, but the guy went bananas and started telling in the room. I finished telling him thanks for his consideration and ran from that company. I was interviewing for a salesperson position. I asked all the candidates to tell a joke, just to see their storytelling skills. This guy told a joke that included swallowing semen, puking and gang rape. It was so out of place. Pretty tame compared to others on here. I was a hiring manager for a fast food restaurant. We were desperate for crew, so my DM told me to hire him on the spot. I spent 5 minutes asking various questions looking for red flags. Seemed okay, so I tell him I can start the paperwork and he can take 2 hours and do the orientation right now and start on Monday. He said no, he has another interview at Subway. Me. Okay, why are you here then? Him. Because my mom said I need to find a job but I don't want to. FF to the next day and he calls and says he'll take the job. Apparently his mom found out and got mad and made him take the job. And the store manager hired him. I call her and tell her about the interview but she still hires him. He lasted 3 days. Class act. BTW, she doesn't listen to me when I say not to hire. I was a manager at an electronics store and was holding interviews for a sales position. A young gentleman came in for the interview. He was tall, but not buff or anything. He sits down, has his legs spread and elbows on knees. He doesn't give me eye contact a lot while I ask him a few questions. The one I won't forget is when I asked him how well do you interact with people. He said, I used to be a bouncer. I know how to deal with people. I immediately said, okay, this interview is over. Thank you for your time. I do some special event festival security and I'm constantly getting people asking me about joining the team. They want to tell me about their time in the army, or whatever police services, or bouncing at rough bars. Meanwhile, I want to know if they've had retail jobs, because the service industry teaches people how to be patient and polite with fools and drunkards. In the middle of the interview for a technician job, he tells me that he wants to change his name and asks me how to do it. I said I guess go to the courthouse and he spent 5 minutes discussing what he will have to do. Oh man. We had a guy coming in for an interview. Huge dude, not dressed very well, maybe jeans and a t-shirt. He walks in and I have him sit in the conference room and wait for someone else to interview him. A minute or two goes by, and another kid comes out of the same car and walks in the door. He was a red-headed kid, super short, and just awful grungy dirty looking. He walks straight over to the water fountain and has a drink of water. My co-worker and I make eye contact and exchange a WTF look, but we just watch. The short guy opens the conference room door, walks in and closes the door and sits down next to the big guy who we are supposed to interview. They sit there hanging out, and the short guy is watching videos on his phone. Apparently the short guy was his driver, although he also claimed to have a license and his own vehicle. We asked the short guy to leave and did a normal interview for the big guy. He did not get the job, lol. Like, who brings their friend driver into an interview and thinks that's normal? Okay. LOL. Side note, another employee said he went to high school with the short guy and that the guy had stolen a ton of apparently valuable magic cards from him. Hiring IT. Candidate seemed a bit off to start with. He made a lot of claims about experience in the field, like writing apps for companies, but couldn't name a single programming language, couldn't explain DHCP or DNS, etc. I could tell it was going nowhere and just decided to pad the interview with some casual questions and asked him why he had moved to our state from California. That's when it happened. It was like he had this speech geared and ready to go. He started ranting about the snowflakes in California that couldn't handle his opinions, went on a political tirade and claimed the liberals drove him out of the state, how happy he was to be with like-minded folks like us, etc, etc. I sent him back to reception to turn his guest badge in, and 10 minutes later our CFO calls me direct and says you will not hire that man. Apparently the receptionist wasn't at her desk, so he wandered to the CFO's office. She was on the phone, so he stood in her doorway and stared at her for 5 minutes while she was on the phone. Oh, and the kicker is that my state is one of the most liberal in the country. We haven't had a Republican governor since the 70s. We were the first to legalize marijuana, for crying out loud. Hiring for an Python developer. The candidate was not local, so we decided to conduct a telephonic interview. The resume showed close to 7 years of experience. Right from the start I could tell the candidate was not honest on her resume. I decided not to continue the interview after 15 minutes. I asked her if she had any questions, and she started to flirt with me. Had to report this to the HR. She was just trying to help your Python develop. Not an interview, but went through multiple resumes of people attaching their social media solely for promotion. It wasn't an entertainment or social media related job whatsoever, it was an hour type position. And people just had social media on their resumes, as in like, hi, this is my Instagram, please follow me. Closest I ever came was a regular at the car rental company I worked at. He was a bit weird, but a lot of the transporters can seem a bit off. Customer, are you hiring transporters? Me, of course. The application is online. Customer, great. Do you do background checks? Me, we're a multinational company. Of course we do. Customer, never mind. Then, we decided to Google him after he left. Turns out he was a convicted pedophile. He must have assumed we would, because he went from weekly rental to never seeing the dude again. A guy came in for a job. He was older and starting to gray, but still of working age. I try to get candidates to have a conversation with me in the interview. This guy strictly wanted to talk about guns, even to the point where it was just pure shoehorning. He would answer my job related question and then mutter, yeah, and I've got guns. Oh yeah, I've sure got a lot of guns. Finally he asked if I wanted to come see them, specifically the ones that were out in the parking lot in his van right now. I'm a 2A guy, but we did not hire that gent. Another guy came in for an interview. He gave me his card. The card was draped in American and Mexican flags, girls in bikinis, tornadoes, money bags, police lights, and in the background was himself at a record spinning table with big marquee gold letters over him, DJ for hire super fantastico. Pass, but I did keep the business card. It's been years, but it's still in my wallet. I pull it out occasionally for a laugh. A female colleague of mine was giving an interview to a gentleman in a small room. Something fell out of his pocket. and she pointed to the ground and asked, "What's that?" He said, "It's my dong. Nice and hard for you." Then of course there was a series of arrogant pricks. If you ever want to lose a job opportunity, be extremely arrogant. I've passed on folks I probably would have hired if they didn't try to condescend to me or pretend like they had it in the bag, and meeting me, their boss, was some sort of annoying formality. I've been involved with hiring some co-op students to work at our observatory in the high Arctic, but the one that stands out in my memory is a guy who showed up unbelievably unprepared, obviously not having done even basic research about the job. We have a question we give to applicants to test their logical thinking skills. Let's say you're outside on the tundra and you're lost. What one item would you want to have with you? Typically we get answers like a GPS, a radio, a flare, some food, etc. His answer? A lighter, so I could gather some wood and start a fire. The observatory is 2,000 kilometers north of the tree line. I had such a hard time not laughing. I was hiring for an entry-level cable tech position in a part of the state with a small candidate pool. Another tech supervisor passed an applicant to me after he filled his last empty position, saying he thought the guy had a good work ethic. I show up to the local office and find a place for our interview, letting the lady at the front desk know to be on the lookout for our applicant. My first warning sign came when she came back to let me know he'd arrived. The first words from her mouth were, "Please tell me this guy won't be customer facing." His resume was sparse, but since it was entry level I wasn't too worried about that. His work history only contained work at his family farm and a single season at a ski resort. I'm from a state with a lot of farmers, and I've known them to be hardworking, so I don't think anything of the limited scope of his background or the jeans and collared shirt he'd worn to the interview. I asked him about his work on the farm and what kind of things he usually did there. His reply was 3 words: "I pick rocks." After a few moments, when it became clear he wasn't going to elaborate on his own, I asked him what that meant more specifically. He said that it was his job to walk alongside the till and pick up any large rocks it unearthed. Okay, what else? Just the rocks? His curt answers and deadpan response threw off my rhythm and made it hard to maintain composure. Trying to find somewhere for my line of questioning to go, I asked him what his favorite part of the work was, given how many years he'd been at it. His eyes squinted slightly as he gazed to the side, as though he was thinking very hard about the question, but was coming up empty-handed. "That's okay," I said. "It's easier for some folks to recall their least favorite part of the job." "What's your least favorite part?" "Picking rocks." Probably the one who, when asked why they hadn't declared their previous convictions which showed up in pre-employment screening checks. Those don't count, they are my dead name crimes. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.